Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Arts Emergency Room podcast. Today we're here with Store Projects. Hello, everyone. I'm Yusuf, and this is...
I'm Louis.
Yes.
And we are part of the Youth Collective. Do you want to explain what the Youth Collective is, Louis?
Right, every month we have meetings. We discuss the state of arts. We think about how can we involve young people in the community, and
Fantastic. All right, cool. We'll get started with introducing our lovely guests today. So we have Kevin.
Hi, I'm one of the project managers here at Store and one of the co-founders as well.
Hello, my name is Taiye. I am a former Store student, I guess. So I participate in the workshops at Store, and then I now work at Store as a Store Young Trustee and help out with some of the workshops we do.
Okay, cool. Lovely. So, Kevin, do you want to explain what is Store for everyone who has no idea and is looking at the lovely background behind us as well? And then maybe Ty, might want to chip in as to how you've been involved with Store in the past.
Okay, so we have two spaces in London, one here in Camden and one in Hackney in Stoke Newington. And we run a design shop during the day. And then during the week in the evenings, we will run an after-school club. So that is design, architecture, engineering after-school club for state school students aged between 14 and 18 years old. And then we prioritize free school meals students, so those who would benefit most from these types of opportunities. We also run 2-week summer schools, and they're usually more focused on architecture and engineering in August. And we will do workshops in schools and portfolio preparation workshops in the winter.
Yeah, just to touch on my role, I guess, is I was one of the first-ish students that you guys did workshops with. So back in 2019, we did. You guys hosted some really cool workshops in design, and we worked with some local designers. Attended after school. So those after-school workshops is the ones that I attended, not necessarily on the weekend. And then after attending a few workshops, I think you actually hired my brother first. He actually hired my brother first. And then my brother couldn't work anymore, so then I took the job basically off his hands. And I said, opportunity to help students do workshops that I attended. Yeah, I'm going to sign up for it. So then I've been working here ever since.
What kind of workshop did you do when you first joined?
We made these vases out of ceramic. We made these 3D ceramics basically, put them in the mold, did the whole process, and then we scanned them and put them into a VR world. So it was our first time working, first of all, in a local studio in London. Second of all, with these designers who allowed us to create what we wanted to make. We just drew shapes on a piece of paper and they said, yep, you're making what you drew right there, in that session that we had. And then also our first time working with 3D scanning physical objects and then converting them into a digital world. And then there's some clips online of us being mesmerized by the 3D experience of putting the VR glasses on, and that was a really cool start to finish workshop that I attended. Yeah.
And for Kevin, how did Store come about? Because you guys do all these lovely little things here, but how on earth did it start?
So it was, I think, about 20 years ago, we were on Store Street, which is why we're called Store, and this is the store of Store. And we did a collaborative installation with about 40 architects and artists. And then we kind of occupied a warehouse space around the corner. We would put on residencies. We built a theatre space. We had workshops. We did a big arts council show. And then increasingly we did more and more educational programs. And I think the summer school was something that is kind of been a constant throughout those 20 years. Every year we ran a summer school. And in the beginning, maybe 6, 7 curious students would come. And now they're sort of oversubscribed with 20, 25 students. So that's been a good evolution of that.
And now you have stores in the Netherlands, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Tessa worked here as a project manager. She's Dutch.
Tessa, who, by the way, hosted one of my first ever workshops as well. That Tessa.
Oh yeah, she did. Yeah. So she worked here kind of. So we've been in this space for about 8 years, and so she must have been what, like the first 2 or 3 or two. Yeah, 2 or 3 years. She's Dutch. She wanted to move back to the Netherlands, but she also wanted to kind of bring lots of what she did here back there. And so we did a funding application together, and they kind of did their own thing as well. They're sort of more they're kind of doing better than we are here now. They've got their own life. It's sort of evolved in its own way. They work with slightly different age groups, and they do these amazing workshops, but the spirit of it's similar, and we kind of share good and bad practice every so often.
How do the projects differ from in the UK and in the Netherlands?
Do you want to?
I mean, I think the first thing to remember is we work with local designers.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have different local designers in the UKs and in the Netherlands. And I guess you're inspired by your network. So whoever you find yourself being surrounded by, or you search to you enjoy their work, then those are the people who influence the workshops. But then I also think that Store, at least in my opinion, since I've been here, have done a really good job of asking the students what workshops we should host. And I guess that's kind of why Store Young Trustees kind of became a thing, is because you guys began to ask us what type of workshops we wanted. And I think hopefully they're doing the same in the Netherlands, where they're also inspired by the attendees of their workshops in the building and designing of their workshops.
What is Store Young Trustees time?
Store Young Trustees is, well, it actually started off as alongside summer school, or maybe after summer school, quite a bit after summer school, of course. But I think Kevin wanted to host a dinner for the students, and he had previously done other dinners where you collaborate with teachers, and I think in 2022, I think it was, or maybe 2023, they did a Growing the Feast dinner that collaborated with workshop hosts, past and present students of the workshops, and I think a few industry professionals, to do a 60-person dinner in King's Cross. And then the year after that, Kevin asked us, do you guys want to be a part of this? Do you want to host the next one in 2024? Or maybe I'm getting the dates wrong, but you kind of asked us, do we want to host this dinner? And that was our first time being given any sort of creative agency, but also a budget and some deadlines and things to hit. And then from there, we kind of wanted to create our own identity, kind of as a subset of Store, but just to make sure that the younger voices are always being heard in the designing of the workshops. And then now it's kind of been a yearly thing that some of the workshop attendees then become Store Young Trustees and get to have a say and influence on the future workshops that are being hosted for the young people.
I've heard that you get involved with pavilions, and that's kind of a big part of the workshops, and to get young people together and to build. And I also see that you like to repurpose waste, and maybe we could hear a bit more about that and your ethos.
So lots of the things that you're talking about are the summer schools, so they're more intensive both for us and for the students, and more ambitious. Unfortunately, we haven't got it here anymore, but there's a really beautiful public bench that students designed and built last year for
We should have sat on the bench.
We should have sat on the bench. So they went through the whole process of designing this object in foam, 3D scanning it at UCL, manipulating the digital model, CNCing these plywood blanks, taking them to a foundry, sand casting aluminium, bringing them back, going to Fallen and Feld, choosing timber, and making these really distinctive beautiful benches, public benches. So that was a really wonderful project, and that was working with, waste, cans and bits of aluminium from the recycling center here. But the whole process was, thinking about how to transform that waste into something new and valuable, and there was just so much stuff in there that they learned. I think was really useful for the students that went through that. And then the previous year we did something more architectural. So we built a big pavilion in Granary Square, which is just kind of up behind us. And that was 3 one-week summer schools. Again, super intensive, like log cabin, joinery, working with an engineer to make this very complex roof, and working with veneers to make these doors. So lots and lots of learning in there, different styles coming together in this unusual pavilion. And then we sort of celebrated it for, we usually always then show everything for a London Design Festival, and those are both examples of things that we showed in the past.
I do wonder, is there a reason why you decided to kind of get into these kind of workshops and to involve the community? What's kind of the motivations that kind of had led this path?
So we will always do the hard path in terms of what we teach, I think. So there's very little, getting the paper out on the table and the crayons and cutting things out with scissors. It's always like, pouring aluminium, lifting something 3 meters high, chopping something up in a strange way, trying to develop a new material, always trying to like push what students are learning, how they're learning, and then also what they can show in their portfolios, so that it will be distinctive when they come up against, their private school peers for undergraduate creative subjects that they might be applying to, or straight into jobs or apprenticeships. They will be standing out with these relatively bonkers projects that they may have done during the summer school or during the after school clubs or workshop in their school. So we did glassware last year with students over 4 days, and that's not something they would have been able to do in school, and not really something they would get to do unless they studied glassware at university. So that's a huge project to have in their portfolio, and stuff they can talk about and have knowledge about now. And same with the aluminium, same with building a pavilion.
How did you sort of start? I guess with store, everything sort of has an intention behind benefiting people. Where did that sort of originate from? Because I know you said you started doing workshops, etc. But did that stem from, oh, this would be fun to do? Or was it sort of like, something is missing and we want to address this? So I'm quite curious to know how the sort of intention behind working with state school students, priority students, etc. stemmed from.
I want to know the answer to this as well, to be honest.
When we first started, a lot of us had graduated from UCL and other places like that, and we could see that there was a lack of diversity. There weren't that many state school students. There weren't that many students from low-income backgrounds, and we started doing workshops more and more that allowed those students to participate, to gain the skills that they might need to then go on and do the courses that we'd done before. So that's probably where we started. I mean, I think it seems to me beneficial, the experiences students have here, whether they go on into a creative subject or not. I sometimes kick around the idea of whether it's good to be pushing students towards creative subjects these days, because it's very difficult to get a job, and maybe that's the same with architecture too. So sometimes I wonder whether it's still the right thing, but I think on the whole the things that students pick up here, the friendships that they make, the confidence that they build, they can apply that to all sorts of different things in their lives, whatever they decide to go on and do. So I think the skills, the learning that you get here is still really, really valuable for young people, and it still makes sense to be doing the things that we're doing, I'd say.
Well, first of all, I was going to say the workshops provide students a thing to do after school, which is like one of the key things. Like when it's extracurricular, it's post-curricular, so it targets students at a stage where they are looking to make whether it's build their self-identity or feel like they are able to do something, build that agency. And I feel like personally that's what STORE provided me with. It allowed me to feel capable of building something myself, basically. I feel like in school you're generally following someone else's vision, usually the national curriculum, but at STORE, and I think what you said about pushing and doing the hard things, they really do believe in that. So I guess things that I've learned from STORE is sometimes do stuff, just do it, like not to quote any brands, but just get something done, put something on the paper. I think we did a hanger workshop where I drew some squiggly lines on a piece of paper and then drew more squiggly lines until I found one that I was really a fan of, and then we made that into like a copper wire that then we put inside some sand and pebbles, and then became these hangers after you heat the metal. The sand kind of like hardens, and that taught me that sometimes you need to just draw something on a piece, like get something done. And then when I started working at STORE, with this whole graduate feast, that kind of taught me even more about agency, because we were given this task that had a predecessor to it that was like absolutely incredible by like the members of STORE, the STORE associates, and we had to just try figure some stuff out. And I think Kevin threw us a little bit in the deep end with it, but he was always there to catch us if we messed up with something. But when you're in the moment of doing it, you don't necessarily feel like there is that catch, and then that made us like action focused, or I guess action weighted. Like we strive towards trying to get it done because it had to get done, and they put the power in our hands to try and get something done. So that's kind of what I've gained from STORE, and now in any project that I do now, I mean, from all of my experiences, but I feel a lot more confident in that regardless of how it goes, just doing something and just getting something done is a thing that should come more naturally to a lot of people. And I think that that comes naturally to people maybe in better positions, who maybe attended schools that allow them to do whatever they want to do. I think that's what I gained, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to dive into some questions, and they are fairly open-ended, so don't feel like you're in a corner. Like, please take the conversation where you want to. So the first conversation is, how can the built environment involve communities within its process? And are there any examples where you can think of this?
So I think, which might be a little controversial here, but I am a big believer in giving students the skills to then be able to apply that knowledge and those skills in that context properly. So I'm less an advocate of get a bunch of the community down, get the crayons out, and let them just go with whatever, and then maybe a bit of that informs the color scheme of the doors along the road. I'm much more in favor of thinking about how can you think about this more long term. So how can that community, or the young people, let's say in this context, how can the young people in that community gain the skills that then will allow them to really participate in those conversations? And by really participate, I mean become the architects, become the planners, work in the council, have all of those decision-making jobs where they can really participate, not just like some of the stuff we see, which is like 3 hours on a Saturday. What do young people think about, the main road? like fine, but there's more that you can do if you really believe in like community participation, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think that, I mean, I'm not an architect, so I haven't really looked at built environments as much. But one thing I can say from my experience is that um, it's always beneficial to have um, everybody who needs to be in the room, which is very difficult to do. But everybody who, all the views or all the opinions or all the different communities that you're trying to build for should be in the room um, during that planning process of making it a space, not an afterthought, as you've mentioned. And yeah, I guess in terms of like how the built community can be a service community, the built environment can serve its community. I was thinking today, I was like, I live in southeast London, so we have a local park that kind of got a revamp when I was in primary school, like a really long time ago. And I remember when I was a kid, I was like, oh my god, they've redone the park. That's so crazy. They spent so much money on it, but it's still an area with grass and sunshine. So I didn't really see the impact of that change. But over the years, I started to see how the community kind of came around the park and used different areas of it for their own intentions. And then there were, I don't want to be too specific here, but there were certain communities who favored different aspects of the park, and you could kind of see like that communities that already existed in the area made that park their own again after it had been changed or after it had been upgraded. So I think when you build an environment, you have to allow for not only there to be change in the initial making of the environment, but also as people use it, allow it to change with the people who are using it and the communities who appreciate the space they're in. Yeah.
I guess with store, a lot of what you guys do is it's sort of a perspective into design through a grassroots organization rather than say a bit more corporate. I'm just looking at all the shops around here that are quite expensive, but don't necessarily have community involvement within them. I guess with the shop specifically, where did the idea of having young people involved with creating outcomes but then eventually also selling those outcomes as well, because I'm quite curious to think about, it's almost like a rebellion against sort of like the corporate capitalist sort of idea of selling products to make as much money as possible. But I guess with you guys it differentiates in that it funds the after school clubs. So where did that idea sort of stem from?
I think so for context, we started 12 years before we had the shop, so that was never in our mind at any point beforehand. And I suppose as an organization we were always flexible enough that like we could do a poetry night above a pub in Somerstown, but we could also do a residency program, and we could eventually do the after school clubs in store. So we always had that flexibility to shift a little bit our priorities and what we did. And being in a space like this, in King's Cross, in Cold Drops Yard, the context is retail. And I think the idea really came, the idea was focused on showcasing student work, not necessarily selling student work. But the selling of student work, I suppose, meant that students were able to understand the value of what they've done, and then they get royalties and a payment for the things that they sell, which builds confidence, I suspect. But it was really important that there's a really clear distinction between the educational program and the things that we sell. So we weren't going to be like, oh well, the glassware that the students made sells really well, so we're just going to do after school clubs, that makes the glassware for the next 3 years. There had to be like a bit of a gap between those two decisions, and it would always prioritize the after school club. So if there are really good learning outcomes in the things that are made, if there are really interesting processes being taught, if the students are going to get a lot from it that they can apply in their own schoolwork, then we'll do it. If it sells well or doesn't sell well, it doesn't matter so much to us, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, because I feel like, I mean, I wasn't there for this decision-making process, but sometimes from the workshops, they're just on display. They're just on display with a placard that explains what happened, or they're on the website. They don't always have to be for sale. And you don't want to run the risk of advertising that students do all the work at your shop when that's not the purpose. I think the main purpose is teaching students about sustainable practices, about cutting edge practices, and giving them an opportunity to try that out, and then giving the people who frequent King's Cross an opportunity to learn about and view the impact of these workshops, and then also parents to come along and see what their students made. I think that's also a thing. I mean, I know a few of our students' parents will come to the shop just to see what the students made in the workshops, and it kind of gives, them an opportunity to be like, oh yeah, mom, dad, I made this, which is really cool. Yeah,
I think that's a really good point about diversifying what you do and not getting kind of put into one note and one flavour, because it becomes like almost counterintuitive to what creativity is when it kind of loses that like spontaneous, that sporadic kind of element where it's like, one day it's this, one day it's that, and you might enjoy things more than others, you might not, but the point is you're creating and you're exploring, and I guess you're doing it together, and it's about being part of a team and being a part of something that matters.
Back to the point about incorporating community within built environment and sort of what is currently happening already, how do you think these organizations could incorporate that without it coming across as, say, performative?
I just wanted to say one thing Kevin always says to start anything is he always says, we're not the best at it, but like I think that's a quote that Kevin always likes to say. You never say, and I've kind of taken that as well, like we've been talking about ourselves quite a bit, but at the same time you have to remember, like, everyone's just trying to improve step by step, and I think that is one of the key things you need to do is be consistent. Store started 12 years before they started workshops, and they were always trying to push this boundary of design, and then that found its way into the workshops, at which point they started to push the students' boundary of design as well. But I think that a key thing is staying consistent, not doing one-off workshops or one-off, like, just trying to consistently provide people an opportunity to explore different things. So yes, like you said, they might not like one thing, but if you show up time and time again, they know that they're going to come in and find something novel, or they're going to build on their skills, they're going to build on some learning. And I think that building, like those compounding lessons that you learn, kind of could be taken on by other organizations. Experiment with not just hosting something one time, experiment with setting up an initiative that can last a long time, so that you can learn with that initiative how to better improve.
Yeah, I 100% echo that. I think we're reliable. If you're a student, you can rely on us to be able to come every week, all year round. There'll pretty much be something on that we'll provide. And if you're asking how can others do things that are more meaningful, or could improve the situation more, I think it is about thinking long term, like a program that will last 5 years, so it will see a student all the way from like 12 years old to graduating secondary school, and that probably has an impact. But if it's like a weekend or a couple of days here and there, there might even be an argument that it's worse than it not being there at all, you know, because they've had this great experience and now they're like dying to have other experiences like that, but they're not there anymore. So I'm really proud that we've been able to exist for so long. I mean, each year is like a new struggle of how we exist. And we've somehow just about managed to scrape through each year. And that means we've been able to see like hundreds and hundreds of students through from ages, 14 to 18 to now working as teachers in schools or working as producers or doing other things. So it's that kind of timeline that I think you need to think about if you really want to impact something. I even think 6 months sometimes is not enough, because you can only do so much in that time.
And then a bit of a follow-up to what you just said. I'm quite curious to know about, because you guys work with sometimes larger organizations, you mentioned Cold Drops Yard, etc. I guess as a smaller organization, when you do get a project from, say, like a really big company, I guess, is there a stage in which you are questioning morally, is this something we want to go for? Or because it's a lot of money, we need to go for it because we need to survive? I'm curious to know how that differentiates at Store.
Our first big experience of like a large company was this Maplin's warehouse that was sort of kind of occupied, squatted, and at some point they just changed the locks, the big owners, and it was because we didn't have insurance, we didn't have a bank account, we weren't a company, we weren't a legal entity, so we were kind of unknown and a massive risk. And so that, I think, kind of set a path for like making sure that there's always a relationship with bigger organizations that isn't going to dominate us, change the way we work, make us do things we're uncomfortable to do, and force us into things that we wouldn't want to do otherwise. And I think that's been steady throughout. So we will really only do projects where we think students will benefit from them, and where we can really put a stamp on them. And I don't think there are I can think of one example where I was thinking like, oh, shouldn't have done that. And that was a short thing. And outside of that, I think everything else, if you look through all the projects, you won't see someone else's stamp on it. It feels like our work.
Yeah, I just want to build on that because I can only speak from the perspective of inheriting like the Store ethos, as opposed to creating it when Store initially started. So over the years, I guess I've witnessed, or we've been tasked with finding designers to work with or looking for companies to work with, and I think it's always been kind of like very nice and softly put when we have a conversation. And I think it goes always back to having these conversations when the organization has a conversation, and we're not the only two people here. I mean, we have a lot of people who work at Store and also contribute to it. When you bring that to the community, then the conversation around it kind of helps guide your choices. A lot of times, I think one of the first things I had to learn was thinking about the outcomes of projects. So when you're working with an organization, understanding what their outcomes are versus what your outcomes are. So with our workshops, our outcome is always in the best interest of the student, not necessarily in the best interest of a marketing campaign or whatever that may be. But yeah, like I said, I've kind of inherited or began to learn the Store ethos a little bit at a time. And yeah, I think Kevin does a really good job in making sure that when a new project comes across, you just send it out to people just to get the temperature, and that kind of starts to guide the direction of whether or not to move forward with something.
I want to talk about spaces that represent us. I think it's quite important that we feel a sense of belonging in the places that we inhabit and work in, and that they actually represent us and they're made by us, they're considered by us, rather than by third parties that interest isn't necessarily ours. From your experience in the industry, is there anything that you think isn't explored enough within corporate design?
Well, you know, I'm going to just flip it a little bit and just talk about what we do really well, and then maybe where that kind of butts up against clients who have expectations of, you know, what regular public realm furniture looks like, if that's what we're talking about as corporate design. You can see maybe in the background to me and stuff in this space that there's just so many different processes and things to touch and prod and see if they're squishy or if they're hard or shiny or whatever. There's just like so much process in this room of different things that have gone on, and that leads to sometimes like slightly unrefined outcomes that aren't sort of super finished, super polished, but they work, you know, and they're really beautiful examples of a process. You can really see how, or you could work back as to how they were made. And I think lots of maybe high-end designs that are mass produced for big offices, they don't have that they are purposefully made so that you can't really see how they were designed or what the thinking was in them. That's just part of that world. And so when we kind of butt up against that and we're asked to sort of insert an educational program into a public realm design scheme, that's where those two things sometimes bump heads a little bit, and we have to, you know, do a stage after that refines them a little bit, that makes them okay for the public realm or okay for the public to engage with on a regular basis. So that might be that a little bit, but equally in this space, which I think also is a little bit woven into your question, we have Uniqlo over there, and if you go in there, it looks like you might have been the first one to ever go into that space. It's that clean. Whereas when you come into this space, there might be a little bit of chewing gum around. There's like a scalpel mark across the table that's showing the work. There's like chalk scuff on the side of the till there, and there's like all sorts of stuff all over the floor. So it's something else has been going on. So if you come into this space during the day as someone who's you know, looking around design objects and you've just come from Uniqlo, this is probably a little bit of a shock. And then you start asking, so what happens in here? Because there are so many remnants of something was on fire in here once, or something heavy dropped here once, or something knocked the edge of that table once. What were all these things? What's all this action? So there's a real nice, there's stories in here that kind of like in the furniture.
I used to work at this shop quite a bit, and every time I walked in, something would be different. And at first, I'd only noticed the difference in like the placement of the products on the table, or the new product will come out, and I'd be like, I have to learn about that product and learn how it was made and all this other stuff. And then it started to be like something's different every time, because there's a stain on the table from the graduate feast because we burned the table a little bit, or there's some blue dye somewhere, or there was a workshop yesterday, and those were the different things that I was adjusting to. But it's become like a love-hate relationship, because you know, you love to see it, you hate to clean it up. So yeah, that's always interesting, walking into Source Store and not knowing what to expect really.
Yeah, I think it's a nice sentiment. Like, design is meant to evolve, and I think we're so fixated on it needs to be permanent, and it's almost quite like self-obsessed with this idea that what we make has to be like this forever, and it has to be clean and perfect. But it needs to have its scars, and it needs to tell its stories, because it's important of why it came about in the first place.
All right, I'm gonna slowly end it off with a controversial question. What's the worst workshop you've done?
But I've had workshops where we work with, and I think this is probably where I first found the purpose of, or the use case of being a store trustee. When you have a local designer who expertise in their craft, but not necessarily expertise in connecting with students. So I've witnessed workshops that have started off where the tutor is talking about what they do, and the students just are just nodding off. They haven't had that buy-in yet. And where I've had to and I was just working at the shop in a retail capacity at that point, and then I've had to like step in and just have a little conversation with the students, while the students also having a conversation with the students, and when the students become more comfortable over time, and they start contributing more. And I think Store when we started, I think it was you and another Kevin and Steen, two Kevins, who made us feel comfortable. And I guess the first time I saw a workshop not necessarily going as smoothly, it was very cool to see myself become the reason why the students became more comfortable. So sorry if it's a cop-out answer, but I guess the worst workshops are the ones where the tutors don't make a effort to connect with the students before then trying to show them something. You always need to have that connection with the students and a mutual understanding, and then you can bring them into your world, and then they can bring you into theirs as well.
I'm not going to say which one it was, but what we have had experience with, and it is part of this kind of corporate relationship to the teaching stuff, which we try to really put a divide between, is that a long time ago a company offered volunteers to teach an after school club, and what really transpired was actually the people teaching didn't know anything, and the students learned absolutely nothing as far as I could tell. So this sort of volunteering, corporate volunteering thing, often, and especially with the teaching, because I think that the teaching stuff is so complex. Like, as you say, there's teaching the process, but then there's also engaging young people and just trying to keep them motivated, making it relevant to them, packing all this stuff in 2.5 hours, and then at the end of the month trying to have some sort of outcome that sort of brings the whole thing together. It's like super complex. So when you have people that are like, oh, I just want to give back, and they haven't really thought the whole thing through properly, you get these like garbage things. That there was, an example that I can think of that was particularly bad, where I felt, why I feel so strongly about it is you sometimes only have one chance with the students. They'll come to an after school club, and if it's that bad, they're not coming back again. Why would they come back again? So you've just lost this student, and it was all on us. So I feel really strongly that they have to be thought through. They have to be really well planned. We have to try and bring in people that we think are going to really engage the students and have something really interesting to teach the students, and so we never do that volunteering stuff ever. We pay people to come in, teach their practice, and engage the students in that, and hopefully then the students build an interest and go on and explore that subject in their own way.
Any last thing you'd say to any young people who are, maybe they're in A levels, maybe they're in GCSE, and they want to go into design? What sort of, I guess, advice would you give to them?
I really believe in peer networks. I think that's a huge thing in a city like this that is so difficult to exist in. You need people that can support each other. You need people who can share skills, share knowledge, share opportunities, support one another. Not everyone's always doing well. We need people to support us through those things. I think that's such a huge thing. It's a form of nepotism, I suppose. Like, that's how you share, like, oh, I know that there's this job going here, there's this thing going here. I think that's why the graduate network's kind of taken off in the way it has, and the graduate feast is this opportunity for students represented by, I don't know, 30 different schools getting together, hanging out, doing things outside of the after school club, making friends that have lasted for years in some cases, and then supporting each other with whatever they're going on to do. So I think that's a really big one for me.
Working on, I think last year we had the graduate feast, and that was based on navigating paths, and we had a really cool panel discussion with industry experts, but also past students, so alumni from the graduate network. And I think a key thing I took away from that was always keep working on what you want to work on, like do what you want to do. So it's very easy to enter this working world and try go into the corporate sector and try justify a later outcome, which obviously works in terms of if you are trying to get financial gain, or trying to find your legs or find your footing. Also at the same time, when you have the time, but not only when you have time, I scratched that completely actually, always working on what you want to work on and doing in the moment what you find to be interesting. I had a really interesting conversation with a past alumni who was a bit worried to share their portfolio because they said their store portfolio was so impressive and cool when they were doing the workshops at store, and now they're working corporate, and they're still doing stuff on the side, and they're not sure whether or not they want to keep their portfolio up or open. And I said, keep it open, share the things you're currently working on, and I think you'd be surprised how many connections can be made from just sharing, not necessarily an end product, but sharing the fact that you are working towards something, sharing the fact that you are willing to participate in things. Like, for example, Yusuf mentioned this to us, and I feel like he felt comfortable mentioning this to us because he knows that we are willing to participate. So knowing that the people around you are also willing to take part and participate and try and make an impact opens you up to more opportunities as well. So don't let yourself be boxed in by the job you currently have. Obviously try to find what you want to do, whether that be within or out of your job, but also let the people around you, like you said, with your peer network, let them know that you're open to doing stuff. Like you're open-minded. You're not fixed in your route. You're not fixed in your beliefs or in your ways, and that you're open to having these like conversations and evolving with, like, yeah. I think when you become an adult, that doesn't mean you stop growing or stop learning. Really, you just keep going. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and yeah, I thought you enjoyed. See you.
Thank you.